It's important to alert women to the ways that context personalizes our lives. Like, so two women might have exactly the same experience, but the meaning and the effect are different for each of them. And we've talked about that, many times on this podcast. But that's because each woman's personal context is different. Not one of us exists in a bubble. We are each surrounded by our own specific people in a specific time and place.
Hello, I'm Cynthia Winward.
And I'm Susan Hinckley.
And this is At Last She Said It. We are women of faith discussing complicated things. And the title of today's 200th episode
Yay!
is Let's Zoom Way Out. Welcome back, Susan.
Hello, Cynthia.
It's great to be back. Season 9.
I was thinking about the 200th episode this morning, and I was wondering how many pages of notes do you think that means we've written in the past?
I can do the math
years?
right now. 7 pages per episode times
7
2.
or 8.
So 1,400. We have 1,400 pages of notes we've typed for this podcast. So we're doing our homework.
It kind of feels like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know if anybody's gotten anything out of the podcast, but we have
I have.
typed out. Yeah, we have 1,400 pages of things we've learned. So anyway, I'm super excited to be back with you, especially about this topic of zooming out. And people right now might be thinking, what? Are we going into outer space? Like, how far are we zooming out? So why don't you kind of give some little bit of an explanation of what we're going to be talking about today and this season?
I can't guarantee that we don't need to go clear to outer space on some things. I don't know.
Well.
We need some real perspective. But okay, zooming out is actually setting up our theme for the whole season. And let's talk a little bit about what that means and what we're thinking when we planned it. So last season, we zoomed in on women's individual spiritual lives. And we decided that this season, we want to zoom out because nothing exists without a context. So context is going to be a really big word this season. And context, for the purposes of our discussions, is everything that forms the setting for something. It's like everything in terms of which a thing can be fully understood.
Yeah.
So I talked just a tiny bit about this in our last bonus episode that we just did, that when we can see and understand ourselves clearly, then we can start to get some idea of where we want to go next.
Yeah.
But you have to get a little distance on yourself to be able to do that. So context is a really important part of the process of spiritual formation. And as always, we're talking about things about women's lives as they relate to church on our podcast. And so I want to start by placing this idea. Whatever the church does, it is never completely objective. And what I mean by that is that when the church acts or says something, sets a policy, makes an announcement, whatever they're doing, it's in the context of, things like history, who the current leaders are, what their current goals and motivations are, what their concerns are, what's going on in the world, all of these kinds of things. So the church is never coming from a vacuum.
I know I've said it several times on the podcast. Like, I always wonder, what would our church look like if it hadn't been founded here in the United States of America?
Oh, right. Exactly. That's such a great
for
example.
Me, that's the biggest one right there. Is it's like, we are such Americans. I can see it so clearly in our policy. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
We're not even just that. We're like Western Americans, like we're Utah. We come out of Salt Lake City.
Yeah, Jello Belt.
Yes, and it
Intermountain
shows.
West.
Leadership. It shows, like, we try to be global, but our Utah-ness shows sometimes. It really does. And so that's one idea I want to put down. But then the other idea that I want to set down next to that one is that we don't experience anything the church does objectively either.
That's where we want to go.
That's where we want to go. There is all kind of complexity between those 2 points, where they are, where we are, and neither of us are coming at it objectively.
I think that's a really good way to start out this convo. Like the person giving the advice, the president of this church, the Pope of the Catholic Church, whoever, they're not coming at it objectively, and our ears are not coming at it objectively. And it reminds me, I just finished reading the book Love Matters More by Jared Bias, and he's one of the co-hosts of the Bible for Normal People podcast.
Right,
You're a
right.
fan of their work. I'm a fan. And he has this chapter in the book called Giving Our Opinion in Love. I chuckle or snort a little bit there, because how often in our own church, it's like, I'm telling this to you in love, when it's really someone's way of like giving you a verbal spanking or something. And
Right,
so
right.
anyway, he was kind of reminding the reader in this chapter to have some intellectual humility in pretty much everything, if we're the speaker or
Mhm.
if we're the listener.
Right.
And he talks about that scripture in Ephesians 4:15 that says, speaking the truth in love. And I don't know, Susan, if correct me if I'm wrong. I've never actually heard that exact phrasing, like speaking the truth in love. Like maybe that's something in broader Christian churches. I
Mm.
don't necessarily hear that in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I think, don't get me wrong, we do it. We definitely like verbally thrash people, but don't think I've really heard Ephesians 4:15 used
Used that
as
way.
used it quite that way. Yeah. But
Right,
anyway,
right.
you and I understand exactly when we hear that phrase, though, speaking the truth in love. Like, oh yes, we all know that, and have sometimes had probably done it ourselves.
Mhm.
So he has this just two sentences I want to read from that chapter, and it says, people who claim they can give you absolute truth are channeling the serpent in Genesis, who promises a shortcut to becoming like God. There is no shortcut for being like God, because we are not God.
Oh. Oh, maybe I want a whole episode about that.
Okay, maybe we will.
Love that idea.
Maybe we will. But I think we do think the church is objective, like that we are God, or that our prophet speaks directly to God. And
That's it.
now, whether he does or doesn't isn't the point. The point is it's filtered through an imperfect man, like we were just saying, who grew up in the Intermountain West in the Jello Belt as an American, experiencing President Nelson was a teenager in the 1930s. Like, this all gives context to his life. And so we think the church is objective. We think we are objective. Neither is true. I think well, let me personalize it here. Sometimes I think I'm speaking truth, and I can say this because I've been a parent, when I think a bit of intellectual humility will tell us that we're speaking opinion.
Right, right.
So I love that we're going to be zooming out, because I think zooming out is a really good exercise in having some intellectual humility. And can I add spiritual humility? I think identifying prophetic humility. Like, I wish there was some more. I don't want to say that. Never mind. Prophetic humility.
No, I really like the term prophetic humility, but I'm really glad that you brought this idea of humility to the conversation, because I think that when you start to zoom out like this, the kind of change in perspective that you get should inspire some humility.
Hopefully.
I think that when you zoom out to the level of like the Webb telescope images that we're getting, what is the feeling that inspires in you? You think, "Oh, I'm nothing. We're nothing.
Yep.
We're nothing in this vastness." And so I think humility is a really great word to start this conversation with. So thank you for that. I was thinking as I was approaching this about going to counseling. I have lots of experience with that. And when you go to counseling, what you're going to do is untangle your life from its context. You do that so that you can understand how and why you are where you are.
That's a great way to put
what are the
it.
things that got me here? Right.
Yeah, I never thought about it that way. That
Well,
the therapist is helping give context to your choices,
exactly.
decisions, experience. Anyway,
Helping you at least see your context, helping you see and identify,
Mhm.
context and the effect that it's had on you. So I was thinking about this in light of my most recent stint of therapy. And one of the things with this therapist that kept coming up again and again is I would be describing things about my childhood. And she would say to me, um, I don't think you really understand that that's not normal.
Oh,
Because
how'd that make you
what do
feel?
what do children think growing up? You think your family's totally normal.
Yes.
The way you do
Yes.
things is the way everyone does things, right? I mean, that's sort of the
Yes.
assumption that a child makes in their world. We're very literal thinkers, right? We're very, our experience is very small, and we identify with a small group of people as we're
Mm,
first starting to become human beings. And we
true.
think that our child is totally normal. Even the most horrible childhoods
Mm,
we think are normal, right? So,
mm,
so there are all kinds of things about the dynamic. I'm not saying I had a horrible childhood. I'm just saying there are all kinds of things about the dynamic in my family that I assumed, well, this is just how families are. This is this is what
yeah.
people do, right? This is what marriage is. This is, I mean, there are all these assumptions that I brought to my life as a result of being raised in my specific family that she again and again had to point out as saying, well, this was not really ideal, and I don't
Mm,
think you've ever understood that. And so for me, this exposed what I came to think of as like a context gap. And what I mean by that is like I can't really be objective about some things, even when I think I am being objective, because everything is subjective based
yes.
on my perception and my
Yes.
specific experience. And that puts this gap between me and other people where when we approach an interaction or a subject or anything like that, there's this gap between my understanding of normal, using air quotes there, and
Mm,
their understanding of it, right? And I think that it's these kind of context gaps that sometimes cause us to talk past each other. And I see this happen at church again and again, where people use words or phrases or talk about ideas or principles. And I'm sitting in the congregation thinking, yeah, you keep saying that word, but I don't really think it means what you
yeah.
think it means, right? We're not even
Yeah.
talking about the same thing sometimes
Oh,
when we
that's
use
happened to me
those words.
so many times. So
Yeah.
many times. Like, did we read the same talk? Did we read the same scripture?
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying, and I think that that is that context gap kind of being exposed for
I
us.
like that.
So, as Latter day Saint women, our spiritual lives are 100% our own. We spent the whole of last season trying to establish that idea for people. But those spiritual lives definitely exist within the context of our church membership and our church activity. And I say that meaning our present activity or not. Either
Mm,
way, if you're listening to this podcast, there's a pretty good chance that you came up as a member of the church, and that's a pretty specific context. But there are also all these additional contexts around our spiritual lives, right? Larger Christianity, where do we fit in that? Specific Mormon theology,
yeah.
that's a pretty specific context. Our church history, our families and communities, our
Mhm.
marriages, our friendships, our politics, our personal beliefs, our education, all the messaging that we've been exposed to as a result of all of these different things. So, having insights to our context can help us understand, evaluate, and sort of reevaluate, or like situate and resituate ourselves within our individual story. And that's a process that I think we're really always going through. We're always kind of refiguring out where we are.
I like that you use that word, like evaluating, reevaluating. I think that's the zooming out. Like if you're gonna, I'm picture picture myself right now, Susan. Like if I were just like slowly backing up, and like the trucks do beep beep beep. It's
Right,
like
right.
back up a little more, evaluate, back up a little bit more. Like that really is the zooming out is just kind of reevaluating and resituating
Yeah, well, we got to
ourself.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
We got to allow ourselves to change, but I think even more important than that and sometimes harder is allowing our ideas about ourselves to change.
I think that is the harder part.
That's hard. And that's some work
Mhm.
that I've been involved in pretty directly, I would say, in the past maybe 5 years of my life.
Mm.
Man, that's
Mm.
hard. Can you allow the story that you're telling about yourself to change? Okay, I also want to frame this discussion in the context of my what I'm offering as my first aha moment of the season.
Oh, good.
Because here's the first thing that kind of blew my mind as I started approaching this.
Okay.
And it comes from a French existential philosopher named Gabriel Marcel. And this is the idea of problem versus mystery.
Hmm.
And let me tell you how Monsieur Marcel came to this. He came to it because in 1914, I think. So we're in World War I. He was a 24-year-old man who was assigned to be the field information officer for the Red Cross
Okay.
in a specific area. And what his job was to handle inquiries about missing soldiers. So someone's parents or fiance or, sibling or whatever file an inquiry with the Red Cross saying, "Mm, our son seems to be missing. We need to find out what happened to him. Is he alive? Is he dead?" And
Wow.
it was Marcel's job to do the research and then answer that question for
Oh
those
my
people.
gosh. Yeah.
And so what he saw and experienced in doing that job was that the Red Cross could hand him an answer and say, "Oh yeah, so and so is dead." And as far as the Red Cross was concerned, like that answered the question. But when he would tell the family what had happened, he realized pretty quickly that that did nothing but create a question and a million questions that
Sure.
those people were going to live with for the rest of their lives.
Mm.
And so this is what sets up the idea for him of problem versus mystery. And he spends the rest of his philosophical life exploring this and breaking it down. And so, why it matters here, Marcel defines a problem as something external to us that can be understood and be explained, like with a generalization.
Okay.
But a mystery is something in which we're personally tangled up. It has roots that go really deep within our personal understanding and experience, but it's also something that reaches beyond us. So while a problem can be, definitively solved, a mystery can only be navigated in light of our individual situation and, the specific people involved.
Yeah, that makes
So,
sense.
where this comes into this conversation is that religion has this tendency to approach things as problems, whereas we're over here operating from this place of mystery. So, like religion can have an explanation of what happens after you die, but that might not do anything at all for the family who has just had their own child die.
Mm.
It feels
Mm.
wholly unsatisfying. So religion treats it as a problem, but it's a mystery because we can't separate ourselves from it.
Mm.
And mysteries are really important because those are like the really growy, hard places in our lives. Those are the things we're navigating and chewing on and trying to deal with and live with. And I've experienced this, I've been through all kinds of weird health things in about the past 7 years. I'm sorry that you hear about them all the time, my friend. Thank you for always being willing to, answer those text messages.
Anytime.
But so time and again over these 7 years, like I've shown up in doctor's offices and they hear my symptoms and they say, they either say, "Well, those symptoms can't really go together," or they don't really fit in the box of any illness that we know about.
Mm.
So you don't have to worry about it. If we can't find it, it can't kill you. Don't worry about that. It's not a real
Ooh.
thing. It's not a real thing. For me, I'm thinking it might not kill me, but it is going to annoy me to death because I'm taking a dozen medications trying to control these symptoms and I'm living with this unknown thing ticking along inside my body, right? And I really need to understand what's happening to me. Doctors think they're solving my problem by writing the prescription. Really, it's not doing anything but manage symptoms that remain a mystery to me and have had a huge impact in my life.
Yeah.
Right? So I think this happens to us in all kinds of places in the world, actually, where one side is offering you, a solution to your problem. And really, you're not really experiencing it as the problem that they're solving. And so this explains to me why mystery speaks to me so much more than answers. Like,
Mm.
here's where the deep misfit comes for me with my church, because I'm experiencing, big life questions as so tangled into my personal experience and context that the religious answers pretty much leave me cold most of the time.
That really helps me, Susan, when I think about, because like you, in my faith life, I've landed on mystery as well. And to the point where I'm probably actively shunning certainty. And
Hmm.
and yet when I think about that in context of like maybe my faith community, my ward or my stake, the people that I'm like rubbing shoulders with when I sit in the pews on Sunday, I'm sure if I said just that sentence I just said to you, plenty would be like, well, that's really wishy-washy,
Right, right,
right? I
exactly.
think to mainstream religious folks, to to talk about mystery the way you and I have talked about it on this podcast is like, well, they're sure wishy-washy. Or maybe worse, they might think, well, if I can persuade her. I I'm smart enough, like I was reading that quote in the beginning by Jared Bias, where it's like people think like they can persuade us with these like eternal truths when they're not realizing, of course, everything is subjective. And anyway, I'm getting off into the weeds, but I just think that's just our tendencies as humans is to want to say, well, I have the answer to this problem. Whereas you and I have experienced enough life now to say, actually, mystery is where I'm finding the peace now. And I love that you used that word when you were talking. Well, first of all, Gabriel Marcel, like just as I had never heard of him, and just you're describing what he did for the Red Cross in World War I. How could that not lead someone to becoming like an existential philosopher?
I
Like
totally agree. When I heard the background story, I was like, okay, now your
this makes
ideas
sense.
totally make sense to me. I
Yeah.
get this. Yeah.
But when you were describing, the idea of mystery here and problem, you use the word navigate. And that has become a really powerful word for me because I'm not just sitting out here in mystery in one place. Like I feel like I'm still navigating, I'm still moving around, I'm still toying with different ideas and thinking and reading and pondering and moving on this faith journey. So it's not that I'm stuck I don't see mystery as being stuck. I very much see it as navigating. So I'm glad you used that word. It kind of gave me a moment to really think about, okay, well, what is mystery to me? And navigating is a huge part of that. Huge part.
I think so too. And I think it's the work of our lives, really. We're always
Yeah.
going to be navigating the mystery, aren't we?
Yeah.
I don't see how we're ever going to land somewhere and stay there forever, but continue to grow. That's just not that can't happen. And so that's where a lot of the
Correct.
rub comes in the things that you and I talk about on this podcast, right? Is that we're trying to come at it from this growy place. A lot of our church training and background wants us to come at it from this specific answer that we land on and stay forever. And that sets up a really difficult conversation between those two things. And that's why you and I say it's complicated all the time, because we're in that middle place that really is very complicated.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to say by way of introing this topic for the season is that I think in a church where we're trying to make space for one another, which that's the church you and I belong
the
to.
goal.
Not sure
Yeah.
everyone
Right.
belongs to that church. We say we do though, right? We say we want to bring the whole world his truth. I'm using air quotes there too. I think in that church where we're trying to do that, it's important to alert women to the ways that context personalizes our lives. Like, so two women might have exactly the same experience, but the meaning and the effect are different for each of them. And we've talked about that, many times on this podcast. But that's because each woman's personal context is different. Not one of us exists in a bubble. We are each surrounded by our own specific people in a specific time and place. So we need to understand that context is always at work among the women in the Relief Society room. And it throws all kinds of wrenches into the works of whatever conversation that we're having. So we can do all the inner work we want, Cynthia, and I intend to do all the inner work I can, actually, but at some point I got to be willing to acknowledge context in that and the effect that it's having. That's where all the meaning happens, for one thing. The events and experiences that I'm having in my life are always in conversation with their context.
For sure.
And I am endlessly interested in that conversation. So I am looking forward to diving into some of those places where different contexts rub up against each other.
I think in our pre-conversation, gosh, I don't know, it's like 2 months ago, I think, when we kind of were talking about what should we do for season 9, and we kind of started having this idea of like, okay, we zoomed in season 8. Let's zoom out. And so we were talking about what exactly could that mean? And I remember saying the line to you, as you kind of just said what you said right now about, well, yeah, we can do all the inner work we want, but we're still, and I said, we're still swimming in the soup.
Yes.
So as much as many Richard Rohr books as we want to read, or as many yoga classes or meditation circles we have, all these different things, we still go home to messy families and we attend church in messy wards, and that is just the soup that
Mhm.
we are all swimming in. And I had a friend leave a comment on she left a comment on a Facebook post I had made. It was actually a political post, but since we're not really trying not to get too political here, I I want to read this quote, not necessarily in the context of politics, but I think it gives context to the soup that my friend is swimming in. And she said this: "Over the years, I've tried to kindly and calmly dispel misinformation and fear mongering. I've tried to share my viewpoint from a gospel perspective. I've tried to withhold judgment and understand others' points of view. In return, I've been told that it was unfortunate that I chose to breed and bring children into the world, that I would be held accountable by God for raising a transgender child, that my husband is probably cheating on me, and that's why I'm so unhappy. Vile, mean, horrible things have been
Mm.
said, and by members of my ward. It is the single greatest trial of my faith."
Wow.
Yeah. So I know this person. I know she's doing her inner spiritual work. And sometimes I feel so badly. But I think when I talk openly on this podcast about my ward, I mean, just before we hit record, I was telling you about this amazing text I got from my bishop.
Right,
So I
right.
have a great bishop and I have a great ward, and no one has ever treated me the way that they have treated my friend. And
Mm.
it's so unfair. And I guess what I'm just trying to say is she didn't get to choose the soup that she's swimming in.
Right,
And we're all assigned to wards. We don't even choose our congregation. I think there's a blessing and a curse to that. And we've talked about that before.
right,
But
right.
there is context to everything. And I remember this conversation I had with Janice Spangler, and I quickly texted her this morning and I said, Remind me of this. I want to mention it on the podcast." And she had told me about when she was at the Living School in New Mexico, and that's Richard Rohr's School of Contemplation and Action. She was talking to him about her own faith in Mormonism, and he said to her, he said, "You can't go somewhere every week where you are made to feel like a heretic and have that be good for your spiritual well-being. You need to take breaks."
Mm.
So I just kind of want to offer that up to our listeners as we're starting to talk about zooming out. Is that soup that we're swimming in can be really hurtful and really painful. And I really trust women to look at their lives and decide when it's time to stop putting themselves in positions where they are the heretic, where someone tells you your husband's cheating on you and God will hold you accountable for raising a transgender child. Like whatever horrible things are being said to a person, it breaks my heart. As Latter-day Saints, I'm ashamed that we would ever do that to each other, and I hope that women who are in similar situations to my friend, um, they take breaks. Whatever that break, they get to define what that means, because it breaks my heart that we do that, but we don't get to choose the soup we're swimming in, which is why we are talking about zooming out here, is because it's all tangled up together, all tangled up.
I sort of wish we'd named this episode Swimming in the Soup. Okay, well, let's talk. Let's zoom back in for just a second and get specific about some areas where we might experience discomfort as a result of that contextual conversation that's going on between our personal life, the zooming in, and our religious life, zooming out. And the
Okay.
first thing that I thought of when we were thinking of making a list of some of these things was General Conference. I think because we just had it. And so I just
Yeah.
had this experience, right? Because nothing reminds me of the rub between things more than watching General Conference.
Hmm.
General Conference for me personally is where I can always see clearly like how my spiritual journey has taken me on a different path from the
Yes.
one that I was traveling most of my
Yes.
religious life, right? And I've come to appreciate, I guess is the right word, that this actually makes it a useful touch point for me. I can sort of situate and resituate, myself on my own path based on watching General Conference, engaging my reactions and the way that I feel to what I'm hearing. It sort of resituates me within the LDS theological context where my foundational beliefs all came from. This is where all of my,
Ooh.
spiritual experiences were formed. This is the ground in which I grew.
Mm.
And so it's good for me to look at that ground now. It helps me understand kind of where I am. And sometimes I think, wow, you've come a long way, baby. And sometimes I think, wow, I can't even believe you were ever in that ground. And sometimes I
Mm.
think, that still feels pretty comforting and pretty good to me.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
it's a useful thing, useful tool for me to watch General Conference, but it really exposes for me how this is a journey, and I'm on it.
Mm.
I guess is the easiest way to say that.
Does it ever feel like when you watch conference or go back and read the talks or whatever, like it's like looking at the map at the shopping mall and it says like you are here?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay, exactly. It's like
Yes.
you are way over here, little
Yep.
lady. You
Yep.
are way over here, and they are
Sometimes I'm
way
like,
over
am I
there.
even in the mall? Am I?
Yeah. You need a different map than the mall map.
Oh, yeah,
That
it's
makes
true.
sense.
Or sometimes I'm thinking, I know this store used to be in this mall. Where is it? Why can't
Like,
why can't I
oh,
even find what I
good
want here?
parallel.
Oh gosh.
Yes. It went out of
Mhm.
business, Susan.
I'm
They
afraid some
packed
things
up.
have gone right out of business. Oh.
One thing I was thinking about in this contextual conversation where the two kind of start rubbing against each other of the zooming in and zooming out is like personal revelation versus prophetic revelation.
Oh, this is such a big one.
Yeah. We had an episode called, I think it was called What About Revelation? What About Revelation? And that's way back, episode 81. And on that episode, we read this quote from Quentin Cook, one of his general conference talks. And he said, personal revelation is available to all those who humbly seek guidance from the Lord. Here's the really important part. It is as important as prophetic revelation.
Wow. I agree. And also, is it?
Is it? Yeah, I 100% agree. 100%. Because, well, anyway, we'll say more on that in a little bit, but those are definitely two places where there's a lot of rubbing going on. There's like a lot of chafing when you start
Yeah.
talking about personal revelation versus prophetic revelation. I don't know. What else you got?
I was thinking about prayer, like personal prayer versus public prayer, because
Oh,
if you've started praying to Heavenly Mother, for instance, or and we know that we hear messages from a lot of women that that's happening for them, right, and
yes.
it's feeding them in new ways, or if you've reinvented prayer for yourself in some way, everyone knows I've talked a lot about that on the podcast, or maybe prayer is a practice that you've left behind entirely because it wasn't doing anything for you. That can be pretty sticky in the context of being a Latter-day Saint. You start to have questions like, well, do I keep saying grace, right? Do I still pray with my spouse? And what's that supposed to look and sound like?
Mm,
Can I give acceptable prayers in meetings, but do my own thing in my own life? And then what do I teach my children about prayer?
mm,
Yeah. I mean,
that's a big one.
that can get hard pretty fast. And so for me, things like Vespering, my night prayer walks, right, that I've talked about, the Book of Common Prayer that I think I mentioned a few seasons ago, getting that and saying,
Mm,
whoa, prayer as poetry. I've been hungry for this my entire life, right? So I have that on my
mhm.
shelf. I dive into it regularly. Um, I say nighttime prayers now, personal nighttime prayers that are reciting passages from the Book of Common Prayer.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, it was so interesting to me. I was in the hospital this summer and they put me into an MRI machine, which is always hard for me, but particularly if
Oh,
it's a
gosh.
brain MRI, because they put
Oh,
your head in this
gosh.
cage thing, right? And then they're like,
Uh-huh.
don't breathe, don't swallow, don't do anything. And there's nothing that makes me need to swallow like telling me don't swallow.
Oh,
But anyway, and it's a 45-minute, thing. And so it was interesting to observe myself where I went for comfort in getting through that 45 minutes. And you know where I went? I went to reciting those passages from the Book of Common Prayer.
oh, I didn't know
And
this,
that
and I love
taught
it.
me something about myself. It was interesting to me. I was surprised that that's where I went. I used to go, my root canal hymn was always The Lord is my light. And I've sung The Lord is my light 7 billion times in the dentist chair because
Oh
it
my
just sort of,
goodness.
I just need places to focus my energy sometimes, and
Yes.
comforting things, right? But so interesting for me to observe that we had left the Mormon hymnal and gone into the Book of Common Prayer instead when I
Wow.
needed it in that moment, right? But like, I don't think I could really talk about that um, at church. I don't think the
Yeah.
people in sacrament meeting want me to get up and recite anything from the Book of Common Prayer, right? So these are uh, when you encounter things in your own spiritual life that look nothing like they once did, and can't really exist in some of the other contexts of your life. That conflict runs really deep, and I think you're going to keep bumping into it again and again. At least in my experience, that's what's happening. I keep running up against that.
Mm. I love that you talk about prayer as being that personal versus public. I hadn't really thought of that until you kind of spelled it all out. Um, and yet, duh, because for me, prayer has completely changed. I very rarely sit down and have a prayer anymore that looks like, well, I don't know. You know how when, gosh, I know you and I are old because I'm sure you, like me, in elementary school were taught how to write a letter. You have the heading, you have the body, you have the closing. This is how you
Right.
address the envelope,
Right.
all of that stuff. And so very rarely do I say my prayers anymore like I'm writing that letter with the heading, middle, and the closing.
Mm, mhm.
And so I don't know that I would ever get up like you wouldn't and talk about the Book of Common Prayer in a public like LDS meeting. Just like I would probably never get up and say like my number one prayer now is just immense gratitude. And there's no heading and there's no closing. I just kind of shout out. We're recording this in November. We're releasing it in November too, I guess. But the leaves are like almost neon yellow
Mm.
in my neighborhood on trees. And I just, as I see these yellow leaves, I just shout out to God, I am so glad. Thank you, God. I live in a world where yellow leaves exist.
Ah.
And to me, that's a prayer.
It's a
There's no
prayer.
there's no
Sure.
heading and closing. And it's interesting because I had received a text message from my bishop. Like I said, I'm really lucky. I have good relationships with my leaders and fellow ward members. And he asked me, what's one of the ways you feel God's love? And I told him that story kind of about the yellow leaves. And to me, that's the number one way I feel God's love in my life is shouting out, thank you for yellow leaves in
Mm,
November. So it doesn't
beautiful.
quite look like it used to, but my gosh, it works for me so well.
Another thing that I thought of is our participation in our wards is where this can show up. Like, what is safe to say out loud in a church meeting? Do you ever find yourself sitting in a class now and thinking, "Can I really say that here?"
Hmm.
I check myself all the time, or like, what will the consequences of me saying this be, or how is it
Mm,
going to affect my place within this community? And I think this is the place that I referenced earlier in this conversation, where these context gaps between us are so often exposed because we just can't know where other people are coming from, and so it's hard to sometimes know the answers to those questions of how well accepted are we going to be in our wards as we're moving along our personal path. Another thing I thought of is marriage. We hear messages from women all the time who
yes.
are actually moving light years away from their spouse in spiritual exploration or spiritual formation, and then they're basically living a double life at the
Yeah.
moment because they're undergoing this completely transformative, internal spiritual journey, but they're also maintaining the same mainstream LDS image to keep the peace in that relationship, right?
Hmm.
And so it made me think of, how does that kind of Mm, I'm not sure double life is exactly the right way to
Yeah.
express that, but it's like you have a foot on 2 different paths,
There
right?
you
So,
go.
like, how does that hold you back from making real progress? And is it sustainable? And is it healthy? This is a lot like what Richard Rohr said to Jana Spangler,
Yeah.
you might need some breaks from that. So that can be a really hard thing. I've been having
Mhm.
been on a different page from my spouse, sometimes for years at a time. I can tell you that that is a really hard place to be.
This one might be one of the hardest, Susan, harder than prayer, harder than the ward
Uh-huh,
participation, harder than general
uh-huh.
conference, because if you are in a committed relationship, you and your partner, like that's a 24/7 thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas general conference, you can kind of give it its proper place twice a year. Well, I
Or
wish it
turn it
was.
right off. Don't watch it
Yeah,
at all. You have a
exactly.
lot more
Yeah.
choice. Yeah.
Right. There you go. That's the word, choice. There's a lot more choice in how to engage in some of those other things like general conference. Whereas, uh, yeah, in a marriage with your spouse, that's really, really hard. I like that analogy of well, how did you say it? A foot on two different pedals or in
Yeah.
two
No,
different
on two
paths or
paths.
something?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to
Yeah.
walk on two paths at once.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's tricky. But it's not even just marriages. It can just be family relationships, friendships, This impacts relationships really deeply. And I have found, you can ask me how I know, I have found that you can be pretty evolved, Cynthia, and still tuck your cross inside your neckline when you have a Zoom meeting with your family.
Ah. Uh,
Because we can make the people around us pretty uncomfortable, which in turn makes the whole relationship feel uncomfortable. And
yeah.
and that's hard. That's hard. Another thing I
Mm,
thought of was knowledge. Our knowledge can create context problems for us because how you know what you know matters, right? So, did you learn it through your personal experience? Did you absorb it from your culture? Like, I absorbed a lot of things just growing up as a Latter-day Saint girl in Salt Lake City. Did you learn it from study, personal study? Did you inherit the knowledge from someone else?
mm,
Which is how I feel like I inherited most of my
mhm.
gospel knowledge, actually, or my theological knowledge. It all came from someone else. And so when you take your knowledge and put it in a new context, how you came to know what you know is going to impact how it behaves in the new context and how it affects your choices and actions as you go
Good
forward.
point. Good point. Mm,
Another one I thought of is grief. We've talked about this. I remember our conversation with Pam Heggie and what a profound experience that she had with grief in her own life, and how much it was impacted by the people around her in her ward and her church community,
yeah.
right? And so the stuff that we have learned about life experiences, the big things like loss and death, coupled with the ways that the people around us are reacting in that situation, can have a really profound effect on our own grieving journey. There are big things that you might not really know what you believe about until you experience them. So people can testify to you about a whole lot of
Oh
things,
gosh.
right? But if they
Yeah.
haven't lost a child, right, then their testimony doesn't do a whole lot for you. And this is a place where the dissonance can really feel overwhelming. I think you
Mm,
can drown in dissonance in this experience. Your experience is giving you one set of emotions, but everyone in your context is telling you something else.
yeah.
And man, that is a hard place to survive.
Mm.
The last thing I thought of, and it's because it is November, is politics. Yeah, I'm going here.
Go, 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 Susan,
Well,
go.
okay, here's the thing. As a lifelong Democrat, in a church where many of the people around me in the pews actually do believe I have no right to exist,
Hmm.
just going to say that because it's true.
Yeah.
I can tell you that the conversation between my church community and my own personal political beliefs has often felt basically like sandpaper. Going to church is like sandpaper for me a
Mm,
lot of times. And nothing challenges my membership more than this. This is actually the most threatening thing to me remaining in the pews. And I think it's
mm.
really telling that I have pretty centrist political ideas actually, but within my church context, I am a radical.
Yes. Okay, since it is November, and we'll see if this even makes the cut, Susan, is I have been sickened by how many women through our podcast have said to us, they have a certain political sign in their yard, and someone in their ward, a church leader, someone will say to them, "You are not keeping the commandments. You need to be excommunicated." I mean, all these things for like voting for a Democrat.
Right.
And 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 the fire hose personality in me wants to turn around and say to these people, "Okay, you realize we have had some pretty open Democrats in our church. Marlon Jensen, Stephen Snow, both of them were church historians. I believe, is it Richard G. Scott or James E. Faust? One of them was really
Oh,
open about
Faust.
it.
Yeah.
It's Faust? Okay.
Uh-huh.
And so I want to throw it back at that person and be like, so should those general authorities be excommunicated as well? In other words, you might need to rethink some of these ideas that you have had before because they are extremely myopic. And that's all I'll say, and I'll stop.
Never stop, Cynthia.
Well, I don't stop with you off microphone. We text about this all the time. I try to be, we have tried to be a little bit more neutral on the podcast. But this is where it all intersects. This is the messy tangliness that you were speaking about earlier, because it all gets tangled together. And because it's November, this is how it's coming to the surface for so many of us right now.
Well, hopefully that list at least gives women a place to start with thinking in preparation for all of our conversations this season about the ways that the things in their lives are in conversation with the other things in their lives, and the ways that the context is impacting them, and all of the different places that it makes a difference, because it's in everything. So anyway, I just wanted to offer that. That is by no way an exhaustive, or by no means an exhaustive list, but just a place for you to get thinking.
Well, let's zoom in even more then. Like
Okay.
if we're gonna talk about areas that rub, like, prayer and our marriages and relationships and all that, I personally thought of some like very specific, I don't know, do I call them gospel principles or doctrine or whatever, where they can clash. And
Okay.
so I think when we, like, in understanding our personal context and understanding the role that our soupiness plays
Right.
into our church lives, it can, like, that can help us navigate those places where things are really clashing or rubbing
Right.
against each other. And so a few of them I thought of, working moms, right? In the not too distant past. I don't even know how would we even define the past 5 years, 10 years ago? When did we stop hearing that women were counseled?
That's a great question.
Yeah, commanded. Were we commanded, Susan, to not work outside the home? I don't know.
I mean, have we stopped hearing that?
Well, I don't know. That's my question.
I sort of feel like we have, but I'm also not a student at BYU, and I have a hunch that girls at BYU are still somehow being communicated the idea that it's important for you to get married and have children. That's your role on earth. I could be totally wrong. Any BYU students want to reach out and let us know? I'd be interested to know.
Yes, reach out. I really would be interested if people reach out and tell us, like, if you're still hearing those messages that working outside the home is bad and should be avoided at all costs, and being a mom is better, as if you can't do both. But that's another, anyway. I'd be interested in hearing that. But and in all these principles I'm going to list, there's a but, because this is where the clashing happens. But we now have a General Relief Society president who has been a working mom
And
her
is
whole
loud and
life
proud about it.
and is loud and proud about it. Yeah.
Worse
So
than that, the church is loud and proud about it, and that
uh-huh.
is, that's been hard. That's been
Yeah.
hard for me,
Yeah.
in the context of everything that I know about my own
Right.
experience and the messaging that I have received.
Yeah.
That's hard.
On a personal level, I am so proud that Camille Johnson is loud and proud about it.
100%.
From an organizational point of view, I feel gaslighted. But we've talked about this before, so let's move on.
Yeah, but this is where zooming out really helps, because then I
Okay.
can see why I'm having the feelings that I'm having about it. Oh, I get why
Yeah.
this feels, gaslighty and really, and then I feel angry about it and whatever. When also, on the other hand, I'm really, really super proud to have Camille Johnson as our president for
Yeah.
specifically that reason. So this is the whole point of the zooming out exercise, is to start to understand, why are you feeling and experiencing the things that you are.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, I know we're all sick to death of talking about garments, but in the great garment crackdown of 2024, we are not done yet. But Elder Holland, in his Leahona article in just September 2024, he contradicted himself in like the very same paragraph, where he's like, kind of like that Quentin Cook quote that I read a minute ago. He said, personal revelation is as important as Prophetic revelation, here's what Elder Holland kind of said about that. He said, and there is forever and ever your Father in heaven who knows you and loves you and understands everything about your circumstances. He would be thrilled to have you ask him these questions personally. Okay, so here's the personal revelation part. But please, oh no, sorry, he doesn't have a but. It sounds like to me there's a
The
but.
but
in
is
here.
implied.
Yeah, it is implied. He said, please don't misunderstand. As you reach out for divine guidance, the Spirit will not inspire you to do less than follow the instruction received in the temple and the prophetic counsel shared by the First Presidency in their recent statement. A loving father will not, and not in these cases is italicized. I'm not the one emphasizing it. He is. A loving father will not help you rationalize doing less than you can to align with his standards of devotion and modesty. Oh gosh, that will bless you now and forever. Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand how we can nod to personal revelation and then quickly turn around and say, but also, God won't ever give you revelation that doesn't align with the prophet. Well, then what's the point? Because do we believe in personal revelation or do we just believe in personal confirmation? And I think it's the latter, and that part really makes me sad.
I think so
Yeah.
too. But I'm really glad that you brought garments into this, even though, yes, we're all sick of talking about it.
Are
I'm not sure
you?
women will ever be sick of talking about. No, I am. And the reason I am is because I think so many of our listeners are like in this wrestle right now and having so many emotions about it. And so hopefully just like taking a step back is going to help people be able to sort through and understand their own emotional reaction to it. Because I think that's what's going to make it, that's what's eventually going to get you to okay with garments.
Yeah.
You've got to get some understanding of your own, how your own soup is working in this before you can ever get to any kind of peace with it.
Right. And we tried to tackle this in our bonus episode a couple weeks ago, like revisiting, did it ever matter? Because I think
Right.
that really leads to that question. Another one, tithing. Woo! Tithing. The church organization seems to focus on like the blessings from being obedient to the law of tithing. We
Right.
hear things like the windows of heaven will be open for you. But individuals want their charitable contributions. I don't know, for example, they want those charitable contributions to help the poor, not just like grow the portfolio of a
Right.
billion-dollar corporation. So those things really start rubbing together for a lot of people when it comes to tithing.
That's such a specific thing. Money. Like money is this tangible thing. So it's this place where the rubber
It's
really
literally
meets
math
the road.
in this place.
Yep.
Literally math.
Yep. Oh, that's a hard one.
How about equality? Women who are concerned, women have told us that they don't want to pass on to their daughters the second class status that they inherited. That
Right.
was ingrained into them. But here's the but again, is they want to raise daughters in the organization that gave them so much good. They just want their daughters to have the good and leave behind the bad.
Yeah, my own daughter is in this wrestle right now, and it's really hard for me to know how to advise. But I hope that
Yeah.
she has the tools to be able to, I know I trust that she has the tools to be able to navigate it, but like it's not easy. It's
Yeah.
not going to be easy. Those questions are not easy to
They
answer.
aren't. Yeah. Just kind of a side note here in my personal study, I've been reading the book When Women Were Priests, and you'll probably have to hear more about it, podcast listeners, because it's blowing my mind. Like the more books I read about the early church, the more like biblical scholars I listen to, the more I can see that women did hold positions of authority in the, I'm going to put air quotes here, in the original Christian church. Like there is a precedent for banning female clergy over the last 1500 years or so, but that wasn't the case originally in the quote unquote original Christian church, and it's really making me angry. It's
That's what I
really
was
making
just
me
going to say. So the more you understand about this, it throws everything that you have heard your whole life in our church
Yes.
into a different contextual light, right? So the conversation is changing between these two things in your
Yeah.
life. That's interesting.
Well, the zooming in portion of this, my whole life has been, all the tired things we've heard, women don't hold the priesthood, women can't be bishop, blah, blah.
Right,
This is
right.
we all have different jobs in God's church, blah, blah. But when you zoom out and you literally are studying the broader Christian church, you go, oh my gosh.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
This changes
Originally,
everything.
yeah, this wasn't this way originally. It became this
Yeah.
way. And then we simply are just sticking to it and saying, oh, this is how things always work. Not so fast. So, yes, it really, it's been a trial for me, Susan. All this knowledge is a
So
trial.
much of this is a trial.
Yeah.
But it's a good
Yeah.
trial, right? This is where the growth and meaning happen. I love it. I love seeing women in these wrestles.
Yeah. Well, I do too, and I'm one of those women in the wrestle, and even though I'm glad to be here, I know likey. It's not
Right. No, I
comfortable.
didn't say you had to like your vegetables, Cynthia.
Yeah. I know. Oh, goodness. The last area I thought of here where things really can rub is when we talk about our LGBTQ siblings in our
Mhm.
church, the broader
Mhm.
church, whatever, because our church, the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, says that gay members need to stay celibate and single, but in a church that taught them their whole life that family, family, family is the most important thing. How can we blame individuals when they pray about this and their personal revelation says that it's okay to find a partner,
Mm.
to get married?
Mhm.
So that might be the biggest rub in our church if we're looking at things at the macro level, really big.
Right,
Like
right.
that
Really
is
big.
so biggy right
Well, and it's
now.
having a huge impact as we watch people kind of wander into that question for themselves. A lot of them say, "Peace out.
Mhm.
Can't navigate this kind of difference." Well, we have a lot of really great conversations planned for this season. So we hope that you will stay with us through all of our conversations. The individual spiritual journey is about a transformation that is going to put everything in new context.
Everything.
Your conversation with everything changes. You are changed, right? So how you fit and experience everything else is going to change too, obviously. So my personal hope here is that this is going to be the aha season where our listeners are saying, now, fill in the blank makes sense. Now it
Mhm.
makes sense. And I hope that that's going to happen for people again and again, because I expect that it's going to happen again and again for me. It's already happening, even just in planning this to have these conversations. Already,
Yeah.
I'm feeling like it's been enlightening. Context informs everything, and therefore it complicates everything. And
Yep.
and the ways that the things in our lives are rubbing up against each other, the ways things are talking to each other, are what give life so much of its richness and meaning. This is where the action happens. So, next time you have a question about why you're reacting in a particular way or why you're experiencing an emotion, I would urge you to step back and just interrogate the context a little bit, right? Go as wide and as deep as you need to until you can start to feel like you have a fuller picture
Mm.
of what's happening. Like when you're taking a photo and you need to move back, move back, move back,
Mhm.
and take one more step back and then take one more step back, because I think you might be really surprised by how that zooming out completely changes your understanding of yourself and what's happening for you in the immediate situation. It's like a
Yes.
way of creating space, or like making breathing room around whatever is happening in our lives so that we can do the work that we need to do to be able to move forward with that thing. And I'm just going to end this episode with a quote from the book I'm reading right now, which is called The Comfort of Crows, A Backyard Air. But I love this quote so much because I think it is, I read it and I said, truth. This is the both and of my life and my journey and really what I'm about right now. And here's the quote. She says, I am learning that it is possible to want two contrary things at once. I want nothing to change. I want everything to change.
Mm.
That's how I'm feeling about all of this, Cynthia. I've got it all pretty much with a white knuckle grip, and yet I also want to be open to all of the change that's coming my way. And so, in between those two things, I think is the sweet spot. And that's what I'm trying to find
Mm,
now.
I love that. Well, I hope all of our listeners will join us the rest of this season, our next 20 episodes, because that's, I think, what I want to do more than anything. Like you just said, breathing room. I really want to help people create that breathing room. I want breathing
I was just
room
going to
in
say
my
I'm
own life.
trying to find it myself. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's the work.
Yeah.
It's the work of our lives. I think it's what we're meant to be doing, but it can be hard. We're not
Mm.
used to it.
See you next week, Susan. Thank you.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Hi, Cynthia and Susan. This is Caroline. I live in Utah. Our stake recently had stake conference, and they held a priesthood leadership meeting on Sunday morning before the general session. My husband's invited because he's the ward Sunday school president. He walked in, and the presentation was titled, "The Priesthood Power of Woman." Guess who wasn't invited to the meeting? Oh, yeah. No woman at either the stake or ward level leadership were invited to attend or participate in this meeting.
Hi, it's Mariah. So the other week I had state conference and I decided to attend. And at the end of the conference, a member of the 70 was present and he spoke to everyone. And his talk was fine. I don't really recall a ton of it, honestly, at this point. But it was an okay talk. However, at the beginning of his talk, he started off really nicely by going through each of the previous speakers before him and thanking them individually for their talks and mentioning a specific thing that he liked about what they shared. And I thought that was really nice, very gracious of him to do that. However, the sticky part came when he got to one of the youth speakers, who was a high school girl, and he asked her how old she was, and she said she was 15. And he ended up addressing the congregation and saying, "You should all look into getting your sons to ask her out," pretty much. Not in those exact words, but he said, "Any of you that have, sons her age or around her age, you should definitely look into her because she will get them into heaven for sure." And I realize, of course, he's just this old man who is trying to compliment this girl on her spirituality and this talk that she gave that was very nice. But for me, it just brought up all these feelings of growing up, feeling pressure to always have to be the perfect one and having to always be the righteous one and the righteous wife and mother because it's my responsibility to get my family into heaven. And it's not fair that that pressure is put on us. And him mentioning that to that sweet girl just brought that all back to me.
But in the great garment crackdown of 2024, we are not done yet. Because if there isn't a big butt in here somewhere, pun intended. Sorry, Susan, I'll cut that out. Kind of like that Quentin quote, or Quentin Cook quote that I read a minute ago. Check out our website to find everything in one place: episodes, show notes, events, merchandise, voice messaging, newsletter, transcripts, and donation links. It's all at lastshesaidit.org. Want to talk about this week's episode? Watch social media, or better yet, subscribe and join our Friday chats on lastshesaidit.substack.com. You'll be keeping the podcast ad-free and supporting other women too. Thanks for listening.